Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Rich Milner, and I am the Dr. Helen Faison Professor of Urban Education and the Director of the Center for Urban Education at the University of Pittsburgh. Here at CUE, our vision is to be a space of learning and sharing with communities to positively transform educational opportunities and experiences. Earlier this year, in order to better work towards this vision, we established a list of 6 core beliefs. Learning. We believe that learning from and with others is essential for building knowledge and understanding. Relationships. That is, relationships are at the core of effective educational policies and practices. Assets. People and communities have a wide range of strengths and assets from which we should recognize, cultivate, and build. Sharing. In sharing what we know and possess to enrich communities in collective interests and equity, and striving and advocating for equitable and justice-centered policies and practices. And finally, action, and moving our knowledge, understanding, and skills into action to improve education and society. One of the ways we try to create those transformative experiences is through our biannual CUEtalks lecture series, which we're glad to see you all here for today. Dr. Tyrone Howard from UCLA will deliver the lecture. We also hope you'll stay with us after Dr. Howard's talk for a brief Q&A, a reception, followed by the Alan Lesko Awards, where we will honor 2 outstanding individuals and 1 organization. We do a lot of work through CUE, as you know, from original research to professional development for pre- and in-service educators. But at the end of the day, we do this work to improve students' educational experiences. We like to include students wherever possible, not only to hear their voices, but to honor all forms of their expressions. And in what's become a CUE tradition, we invite student artists, writers, poets, musicians, and dancers to join us at each lecture to showcase their talents. So now, I'd like to turn your attention over to Mr. Derek Heck, one of our graduate student fellows here at CUE, who will introduce today's performers. Derek. Let's give Derek another hand. You know he should be up here. He should have already been up here.
Good afternoon. I do thank you all for being here. I wanted to share this bit of information about the Shona Sharif Dance and Drum Ensemble. Unfortunately, they had a difficulty in getting here, so they have not yet arrived, and so we do apologize. But let me just give you a brief background. The ensemble is the manifestation of generations of artists that include the work of the late Catherine Dunham, who was an inspiration for the work of the late artistic director Shona Sharif, who in her phenomenal career that took her from Broadway to Hollywood undoubtedly shaped the career of Arande Sharif, who was on faculty at the University of Pittsburgh. Arande is a member of CRAE, which is the Culturally Responsive Art Education Group through the Pittsburgh Board of Education. He teaches African dance at PPS via this program. As board chair of the Shenley Heights Community Development Corporation, Arande volunteers to teach dance through their after-school program. For the teachers in the audience, you can connect with Mr. Sharif and find him on Pitt's website and arrange a series of workshops for your K-12 students. And the reason we wanted to honor the dance ensemble today was because they have found ways to insert themselves into the fabric of the Pittsburgh public community, and they have taught culturally responsive art to students all across Pittsburgh. And so when you're thinking about how to connect students and how to connect culture with students, we hope that you will engage people like and groups like the Shona Sharif Dance and Drum Ensemble. So in their absence, let's please do give them a round of applause. Thank you.
And so now I understand why Derek was not up here, right? I want to take a minute to acknowledge all of the people who keep CUE going. Thank you especially to the Heinz Endowment, the Grable Foundation, and the McGrevin Family Fund for generously supporting our work. And because people are an integral part of the work we do at the Center for Urban Education, I would like to acknowledge some people who support the center in extraordinarily important ways. First, if you're in the audience, please stand if you are a core team member of the center. And I see core team members standing in the back and so forth, so please wave if you are. If you're seated, please stand. That's right. Thank you. We work with an incredible group of faculty and graduate student fellows. If you're in the audience, graduate and faculty fellows, please stand so that we might recognize you. Thank you. The Heinz Fellows are here today. This class of fellows is already doing outstanding work in the Pittsburgh Public Schools and the community. Heinz Fellows, please stand. Thank you. I'd ask now for university urban scholars and ready to learn scholars. If you're in the audience, please stand so that we might recognize you. I would also like to give a special round of applause for any middle and high school student present in the audience today. If you are a middle or high school student, please stand so that we might celebrate you. Thank you. Tyrone C. Howard is professor in the Graduate School of Education and Information Studies at UCLA, where he also serves as Associate Dean for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. He is the author of several best-selling books, including Why Race and Culture Matter in Schools and Black-Mailed, Perils and Promise in the Education of African American Males. His most recent book, Expanding College Access for Urban Youth, documents ways schools and colleges can create higher education opportunities for youth of color. He has published more than 100 peer-reviewed journal articles, book chapters, and technical reports. Dr. Howard is the founder and director of the UCLA Black Male Institute, which is an interdisciplinary cadre of scholars, practitioners, community members, and policymakers dedicated to improving the educational experiences and life chances of Black males and other males of color. A native of Compton, California, he says proudly there, where he worked as a classroom teacher, he has been named one of Education Week's 50 most influential scholars on educational policy, practice, and reform in each of the last 2 years. In 2017, the American Educational Research Association, the nation's largest research organization, honored Dr. Howard as an AERA Fellow, an honor reserved for scholars who embody the highest standards of excellence through accomplishment, professionalism, and commitment to education research, practice, and policy. I'd like to add that Dr. Howard is my mentor. He was my professor at The Ohio State University. That's right, I said it. He is my best friend, and he's also my brother from another mother. Ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming to the University of Pittsburgh, Dr. Tyrone C. Howard.
Wow, that That was a phenomenal introduction. I want to, before I get into what I have to say, and I have a whole lot I have to say. Yeah, I was a little nervous because I think I need that. Yes. Good looking out, Matt. You all have a jewel here in Dr. Rich Milner. Can we give him a huge round of applause? Huge round of applause. You know, I tell classroom teachers, you never know who you have in your classrooms. You never know the brilliance or the genius that rests in your classrooms. And I would have never imagined, I'm not going to say how many years ago, but many years ago when this gentleman walked into my classroom that he would have built what he has built here at the University of Pittsburgh. This is a phenomenal, phenomenal task. He is truly my B-fam, as he said, brother from another mother, best friend in the whole wide world. He's a great scholar, he's a great intellect, but even a better person. So I can't say thank you enough, brother. Love you more than you know. So he has assembled, yeah, oh, yeah. Your men say these kind of things too. So anyway, and he's assembled a phenomenal team. This is like a dream team from Lori and Dana, the new addition, all the amazing graduate students that he has here, Ira and Adam. Adam is socializing his young son already, getting him exposed. Kenny, and the list goes on. Thank you all. Give them another round of applause. It's an amazing, amazing dream team they have assembled. And I love the pipeline. They got the Hines Fellows. You all were phenomenal, right? I'm going to brag about you. Just know you're going to be shouted out all over the world, okay? Because you're all phenomenal. Keep agitating with what you do. I appreciate that. And also to my young folks over here, my high school folks, give them another round of applause. Thank you. Shout out. They probably don't like me doing this, but I'm going to let you know. If you want to come to college in California, let's talk afterwards, okay? We got warm weather, we got sunshine, we got beaches nearby. Come on out to California. So let's talk afterwards, okay? I just want to thank you all for the invitation and opportunity to be here. I always say up front, I have a lot to say and probably not enough time to say it in. So I'm going to run through this, but I know I'm going to apologize in advance for not covering it with the kind of depth and preciseness that I probably should and want to, but I feel like there's so many issues I want to address, so please forgive me if I don't go through the points the way that you would like for me to. Let's save that for the Q&A. Lori's going to keep me on point so I don't talk for 2 hours straight, so thank you, Lori. So I want to talk a little bit about race, culture, and trauma. And my work has been centered on issues of race and culture for some time, looking at how and why we don't talk about race, looking at how culture manifests itself in learning and thinking. But of late, I've kind of shifted to trauma, and I'll talk about that in a second. But before I get started, I want to make sure that we all stay connected to the work, right? So I have learned how to, my daughter keeps me on point with Twitter. She said, Dad, you got to tweet, you got to tweet, you got to tweet. So I'm trying to stay connected as best I can. So let the conversation continue beyond today and this evening because as you all may not know, I've learned recently that Twitter is the largest, I guess, sort of place where educators come to exchange ideas and thoughts and resources. So let's keep the conversation going from here. But I want to start by saying that one of the questions I frequently get when I go out and spend time in schools and talk to teachers is why, Tyrone Howard, do you still talk about race? We get it already, enough already, move on to something else. And I just refuse to do that because, folks talked about we were in this post-racial space. And I always say you can't be post-racial until you've been racial. And I don't think we've been racial enough yet to understand sort of the challenges that we face. So I always try to hit folks with data to say this is why we have to keep talking about race and why race needs to maintain sort of a focal part of what we do. So I start here. We're looking at graduation rates in this country. And I promise you I won't bore you with a whole lot of stats and data, but I think some are really worth noting. If you look at graduation rates in this country across the board, and this is our most recent data from the U.S. Department of Education, we see that consistently African American, Latino, and Native American students consistently underperform their counterparts in schools. And moreover, we see that when we're talking about African American and Native American Latino males, there's also a discrepancy that continues to remain stubborn. Even though we've seen increases in their graduation rates, I still think we are not where we need to be if only 67% of our black males, 76% of our Latino males, and only 70% of our Native American males are graduating within a 4-year period. We have to do better, and part of that having to do better means we've got to talk about race, address race, and be very explicit about race. So, I share that data, and folks still say, well, okay, Dr. Harper, but okay, we get the fact that we still need to do better with our high school graduation rates. But again, they come back to the question, but why can we still keep talking about race? Can we move off of it? And I say, no, we're not going to move off of it, because oftentimes we don't want to move off of it because it makes folks uncomfortable, it makes them uneasy. But I'm saying that we won't get to our destination until we address those obstacles that continue to impede the prospects for some of our young people. So to that end, I always say, okay, let me tell you, it's not just a problem we have on the back end when it comes to graduation, because, see, this is systemic, and it starts early on in our processes. And unless we're not willing to be honest about where and how this starts, we're never going to get to root causes. So case in point, I oftentimes show the fact that we now have data that comes directly from the U.S. Department of Education that looks at preschool. And we are now suspending children in preschool. Let me say that one more time. We are now suspending children in preschool. Those are two words that should not go in the same sentence. Preschool and children. How old are you in preschool? What, 3, 4 years old? I don't know what you do. I don't know if I have some early childhood education. I don't know what you do in preschool that requires one to be suspended, but it's happening. And not only is it happening, but it's disproportionately happening to black and brown boys. That's a problem. When you look at the fact that black and brown boys make up about 20% of all preschool-aged children, but they make up over 60% of the babies, and that's what I'll call them babies, of babies who are being suspended, we should all say, okay, well, yes, maybe this race thing is important, we have to address it. And we're talking about almost 70% of all babies that have been suspended more than once. It begs the question of why we have to talk about race. See, because what we do early on, we start telling our young children at an early age they are a problem. They are a problem, they are a problem. So if someone consistently tells you you are a problem, what do you start to think about yourself? I'm a problem. So once you start thinking about yourself in that way long enough, that I am a problem, then how do you start to act like a problem? W.E.B. Du Bois has this phenomenal article in his book, The Souls of Black Folks, How Does It Feel to Be a Problem? And unfortunately, too many of our young babies learn at an early age that teachers deem them as problems, and that's part of the reason why we have to address race, because if we don't address it, we let folks walk around with these labels of being talked about, being seen, being viewed as a problem. That in and of itself is a problem. So therefore, we have to look at this on the back end, we have to look at this on the front end, because if we don't disrupt this now, if we don't challenge this now, we find ourselves in this dilemma where we continue to incarcerate young people at ages that we should not incarcerate them. I say in this country, we are an incarceration nation. We lock up young folks at early and disturbing rates. We have incarcerated close to 60,000 young people in this country. Overwhelmingly, they're disproportionately black and brown boys, and we are ground zero for where we lock up young people. There's nothing more devastating, more depressing, more distressing than to walk onto some of the juvenile camps in this country and see young boys as young as 8 and 9 years old walking around in orange jumpsuits. But it is happening, and we are doing this in a way that we are now profiting, or certain folks are profiting. We've got more for-profit prisons in this country now than we've ever had. You all can look them up, Geo Corporation, Whack and Hunt. Part of what I tell teachers is that when you begin to discipline and expel and push out children at an early age, you start this process in mass. And we have to begin to talk about this. One of my must-read books for all my students is this book that I'd recommend called Burning Down the House, because it documents the real travesty involved in incarcerating young people in this country. And we have mastered this art more than we should be proud of. And we will not disrupt it, we will not stop it until we have some honest, open, and sustained conversations about race. Because this is overwhelmingly black and brown children. Black and brown boys are the #1 pundits, but what we see now is that the fastest growing group of young people we're locking up are now girls. By the way, black and brown girls. We cannot ignore that. The last 2 years, we've seen a 400% increase in the number of young black and Latina girls who are being incarcerated. So this is why I talk about race, because I'm not gonna get off of it until we begin to address some of these disparities, because they are long overdue, they are uncomfortable, they are oftentimes awkward, but our babies who are in these jail cells are oftentimes uncomfortable, and that is awkward. So we have to push and agitate till we see the transformation that we wanna see. Now, I always talk about this with teachers because teachers think, well, this is not my problem. I don't think this has anything to do with me, but I think we have to recognize that we have a big racial divide in our schools, right? We continue to see that who teaches looks different than who learns. So if you look at the makeup of the teachers here in Pittsburgh, what we see is something that's no different than what we see in districts across the country. Overwhelmingly, classroom teachers are white. Overwhelmingly, they're women. Overwhelmingly, they're monolingual. And overwhelmingly, they are middle class. And part of what we see is that we have a teaching population that's becoming more and more homogeneous and a student population that's becoming more and more heterogeneous. that means we need to have conversations. What does it mean to be a white person, white woman who's monolingual and middle class, who's had very little exposure to children of color when she walks into that classroom with those children of color for the first time? We have to talk about that. We have to unpack that, because in some ways you have good intentions, but oftentimes bad outcomes. And I think until we talk about what cultural competence looks like, until we talk about racial awareness, we are not going to address the core root of the problem. And part of what we have to figure out is how do we begin to diversify our teaching force, because these numbers are only going to increase based on who is in teacher education programs. So I'm not saying that white teachers cannot be effective teaching children of color. I'm saying that first and foremost, we want a more teaching force that is diverse, but at the same time, we want teachers who are highly trained, highly competent, and racially aware of the realities that young people come into the classroom with. So we have to acknowledge this reality in terms of who teaches, okay? Now, let's go one step further, because what I hear many teachers say is that, why do you bring up race? Because at the end of the day, I don't even think about race. I don't even see race. I'm colorblind. If I hear one more teacher say that, I'm going to scream loud, okay? I tell folks all the time, don't lie to me, don't lie to yourself. We all see race every single day. The question is, what do we do with it? How do we make sense of it? How do we manifest it in our practices, in our pedagogy, and in our school policies? So part of what we have to move away from is this notion that race does not exist, or race is irrelevant, or race is insignificant. It always intrigues me when folk of color are told by white folks that race does not matter. And my question is, how do you know, right? It's just like when we talk to women about issues around gender equity and men tell women these issues aren't real. Again, how do you know? So I'm saying we have to have some conversations that folks don't want to have, but they're very necessary because we are uncomfortable talking about the elephant in the room. If that makes sense to folks, right? So the next time someone tells you, I don't see color, you know what to tell them, right? Right? Okay, I hope y'all know, okay? Tell them they do see color. So what we ask is oftentimes when I engage my pre-service teachers, we come down to this burning question. And I've been asking, so folks say, okay, if it's not race, what is it? And I always say, why do some students succeed in schools and others do not? And you can imagine the kind of response I typically get. It's typically centered around, well, if parents did their jobs, schools would be better. If parents had better values, schools would be better. If kids came in with the right attitude, they would be better. It's always sort of deflecting the responsibility and the blame on home, on students, on communities. And part of what bothers me is this idea that now the new lingo is these kids just don't want it bad enough, right? They don't have the right disposition. What they need is this four-letter word right here, grit. This is another one that's starting to upset me, right? These kids just don't have grit. If they had more grit, they would be better off. If they adjusted their attitudes, if they tried hard, if they stopped making excuses, they would do well. And I hear even teachers of color who engage in this conversation about, you know what, they need to have the growth mindset. I'm not knocking growth mindset, I'm not knocking grit, but I maintain that some of the most grittiest kids in our schools are poor kids who are doing everything every day just to show up at school. That's grit, right? Kids who are living in circumstances that no child should have to live in, but yet they still maintain their sanity, that's grit. Young kids who we tell over and over again that they can never amount to anything, but these kids go on to college and do amazing things, that is grit. So don't tell me that kids of color and poor kids don't have grit. We just don't ask the right questions to assess their grit, right? So now these folks even have like books that they use as their rationale to say, see, it's not just us. So we have How Children Succeed, right? This is like one of the books that's supposed to help you to understand what kids need to have. Or we say, you know what, we have to help teach kids perseverance and resilience. And now, the book that is like the go-to book for all these folks on grit, you all know this book, right? This has become like the Bible of all folks who want to say, see, it's not the schools that's the problem, it is the kids. And let's see how we can teach kids how to have grit. They need to have grit. Because Angela Duckworth says that they can do X, Y, and Z. I got into a big argument at a conference with Angela Duckworth. I'm like, you know what? You can't tell me the first thing about grit, lady. I'm sorry. When people who don't know this reality try to tell other folks, it just unnerves me, right? It's kind of like it's almost like what I call Ruby Payne 2.0 in some ways, right? It's like, okay, here we are. These kids need to just do better. They need to develop this big R word we talk about, which is what? Resilient, right? They just need to be able to have, stick-to-itiveness and don't give up and be flexible and stick at it. But my thing is, what is fundamentally missing from this analysis, what is inconspicuously absent from this conversation, And this is the conversation I had with Angela Duckworth when I saw her about a year. I was waiting to just get at this woman. Like, you don't understand what you're saying. I take this personal, because that was me growing up, right? That was my neighborhood. That was my community. And there's lots of folks every single day who show unbelievable grit, but you want to tell me because we don't score well on standardized tests that we don't have grit, right? So my thing is, why do we expect children, to change their efforts, but we don't change the situation around them, right? So we don't talk about underfunded school, we don't talk about underqualified teachers, we don't talk about inept leadership, we don't talk about flawed policies, we don't talk about the way in which we have tracking systems that give poor kids limited chances. We don't talk about any of those systems and structures, but we tell kids you have to try harder. My thing is, if you want to be honest, intellectually honest, we can't ask kids to change unless we're willing to change the systems around them. Because I maintain that the kids would thrive no matter what, but if you give them more healthy, more viable options, more viable situations, their effort will continue to supersede the circumstances that they're in. So my thing is, let's be fair to children. Change the circumstances and situations around them, and you'll begin to see different outcomes. So let's take this one step further. So what I've been doing of late is talking to some of my teachers and some of the educators we work with around this concept that many of you are familiar with in Ed Psych around attribution theory, right? So attribution theory is critical. It talks about the ways in which we all begin to explain human behavior. And so what I oftentimes say, based on what I've learned from folks who are experts in this field, basically attribution of the reasons we give for our own and others' behaviors. Why do people do what they do? We're all armchair psychologists, right? I got 4 kids. I can tell you many a day, me and my kids were rushing off trying to get them to school, and my son can find his left shoe, but he can't find his right shoe. What do I have to do to put these shoes together? Put the left shoe and the right shoe together. My daughter would be in a haste. We're about to leave, and she can't find her glasses. She got the glass case, but no glasses. Like, sweetie, put the glasses in the glass case every time, right? You don't lose them, right? How do we get people to do the things we want them to do? So we're motivated to understand behavior, but if you look at the field of ed psych, and one of the things that psychologists tell us that we do is that we make a fundamental error when it comes to attribution. I think this is important for educators. The fundamental error that psychologists say that we make is that we tend to overestimate the power of the person and underestimate the power of the situation, okay? I'll say that one more time. We overestimate the power of the person and underestimate the power of the situation. And I think that's important here because what we oftentimes tell young people to do is, again, grit, 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 work hard, don't make excuses, all good values on the surface. But again, we have to look at the context, the environment in which those decisions are being made. So then the question becomes, why do we expect people to overcome certain circumstances? Why do we put so much focus? We love the individual success story, right? We love to talk about the individual who came from rags to riches and what they did because the inherent message is, guess what? If this person did it, then that means that you can also do it. And it goes one step further. It says, not only does that mean that you should be able to do it, but if you don't do it and that person did it, then you just didn't want it bad enough. You just didn't pursue it hard enough. And I'm saying that's a flawed argument. It's a lazy analysis that doesn't take into consideration contextual factors. So the question becomes, why do we do this? And psychologists say we do this for a very selfish reason. And that reason is the following. So the question becomes, why do people make this fundamental attribution error? And what psychologists say is that basically the situation is not important when people make attributions for the behavior of others. But the situation is important when making an attribution for one's own behavior. Somebody should have shouted amen or hallelujah or something on that one. I want you to really kind of understand what we're saying here, folks. So the situation matters when it's us, but it doesn't matter when it comes to other people, right? So I saw this play itself out, almost to the letter at a school I was at about 2 months ago. I was in a 3rd grade classroom. Bell rang at 8:30. Young boy walked in about 8:35. He was about 5 minutes late. His teacher told him, you're late, go get a late pass. He said, well, let me explain to you. She said, nope, go get the late pass. He said, but what happened was, she said, nope, go get the late pass. He said, but please, let me try to tell you. She said, I don't want to hear it, go get the late pass. So he stormed out of the room. He went to the office. He came back. He had his late pass. And then you know how he was after that. He came, he slammed the late pass on her desk, and he went to his table, kicking everything on the way. He was upset. Why do you think he was upset? She wouldn't listen to him, right? 5 minutes late. So I'm in the school for the entire day doing some work that we do at this school. And so we had an in-service session that started that afternoon at 2 o'clock for all the teachers in the school. 2 o'clock. That's the hour before 3 o'clock, the hour past 1 o'clock, just if I'm not clear, okay? 2 o'clock. 2 o'clock, our PD starts, and almost all the teachers are there. So y'all know I'm going with this now, right? Almost all the teachers are there. So we start the work, and about 2:30, guess who rolls in? Come on now, can we talk, right? Who rolls in with bags and books and everything? The same teacher who that morning had told that young man, go get the late pass. And when she walked in, you can't make this stuff up. She said, oh, Mr. Doctor, I'm sorry. I had to go call my daughter and check on her because she wasn't feeling well. Then after that, I had to go get something out of my car. Then I need to go check on something I had in my room. So she's giving me all these explanations. You know what I want to tell her, right? Go get your late pass, right? Because she had no tolerance when that young man was late, and he's 8 years old. But she walks in 30 minutes late, and it's an explanation as to why she's late. So the question is, why do we want people to understand our stuff, but we don't understand the stuff of the young people that we serve every single day? That is called genuine hypocrisy. When I grew up in Compton, we called that being two-faced, right? So there's a whole lot of terms you can call it, but part of the issue is our kids pick up on it, and they see it, and they know it, and they will call us out on it and say, you are quite wrong to say you won't listen to me, but I got to hear all your explanations about why you don't do things. So bottom line is, people are more inclined to take their situation into consideration than others. So part of what I say, we should be constantly asking ourselves, everyone who's concerned with young people, every single day is, what is the situation for our students? Because you can't do this work if you don't understand the situation. Remember, psychologists say we overestimate the power of the person and we underestimate the power of the situation. So let's kind of bring it home. Let's talk local. Let's come here to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Let's say, what is the situation for young people here in Pittsburgh? Because I think if you're going to walk into classrooms and you're going to do justice work on behalf of some of the neediest students, you have to know the situation. So here we have a snapshot. I got a group of doctoral students who work with me, and we break down classrooms in every city that we do work in. So now we broke down your city. So what we do is we take the 24,000 young people that you have in PPS, and we say, if this were an imaginary classroom with all ratios and proportions being the same, what would that classroom look like? Okay? Number one, we have to understand that 20 out of the 30 students will live in poverty. This is just a snapshot. Some of the schools, you know, that number is 30 out of 30. I maintain that poverty, perhaps more than any other factor, is the single biggest challenge to helping young people be successful. Okay? But I will say this, and I say this in every fiber of my being. If you don't believe, or anybody you work with does not believe, you have to believe that poor kids can be successful. If you think poor kids cannot learn, you should not be doing this work. You should not be in this profession. We can help you find something else. You can babysit folks. You can do all kinds of things. But part of the problem is too many folks think that poor kids can't. And my thing is, I think some of the smartest, most intellectually gifted kids in our schools are kids who come from low-income backgrounds. We just don't assess them on the right things. See, poor kids, they have a sixth sense because every day they have to learn how to do what? Survive. Say that again. Survive. So see, me and my wife had this running joke, right? I grew up in Compton, California. She grew up in South Central LA. We got 4 beautiful kids. Love them with all my heart. Spoiled, but I love them, right? And so we had this running joke, like one day, and they have a very different upbringing than us. They are, oh my goodness, talking about privilege, but anyway, I won't go there. So we have this running joke that one day we're gonna drop 2 of the kids off in Compton and 2 of the kids off in South LA, right? And tell them to get home the best way they know how. My wife, please don't do that to my babies, they won't make it, right? Because these kids have unbelievable book sense, but what they lack is what? Street sense, common sense, right? And that's why I always say, you give me low-income kids, we can figure some stuff out. I will go to war with those kids any day than some of these privileged kids that I didn't raise because they don't know how to fight. But the bottom line is, understand that I just cannot buy this mantra about poor kids not learning. I take this one personally because that was me. And I know I stand here now because there were folks who saw something in me that I oftentimes did not see in myself. And I'm willing to say I'm probably not the only one in this room. I'm sure about half of us in this room know what I'm talking about because that was your upbringing as well. I know I wasn't the only one who had sugar sandwiches for dinner sometimes. Right? Okay, I'm going to stop that one because I'm going to put folks in trouble. So let's stay with the classroom. Of these 20 students here in Pittsburgh, you know you have 3 of the 20 were living what's considered extreme poverty. Understand you're walking into schools where you got children who come from families with a household income of $10,000 a year or less. Do the math on that, folks. $10,000 a year or less is how much a month? It's like, I don't know, carry you one. How about less than 1,000? How about that, right? It's not much. And think about what your average rents are. We looked up some of your average rents. They're about $1,000 a month here in this county. So even after you pay your rent, how much do you have left? You're like, I carried my one, I still have nothing left, right? So the bottom line is you have families, you have children who come from these extreme impoverished backgrounds where just trying to pay rent is a reality check. Know that, understand that. You've got children who walk into your classrooms, into your schools, who have oftentimes gone 12, 15, 18 hours in between meals, right? Let a group of grown folks meet for 3 hours without a meal. You're gonna have an anarchy on your hands, right? We get what I call hangry, right? We get hungry and angry, but we got young people who face that every single day. This is your classroom. Let's stay one step further in class. We know that 20 out of the 30 students would be non-white. Again, we got to talk about this thing called race. And we know over half of these would be African-American students. Oh, by the way, we know that 1 in 4 of your African-American students will be in special education. 1 in 4. Why is that? Again, we come back to this question of race. Why do we continue to think that it's okay for black children to be in special education, but we don't think that they're worthy enough to be in gifted education? Okay? Another conversation for another day, right? Let's go one step further. We know that also in this classroom, we know that approximately 5 of the 30 students would speak a language other than English. They would speak one of the more than 40 languages spoken in Allegheny County schools. So language diversity is something we need to learn how to embrace, even in Pennsylvania, right? Because this number is only going to go up. It's only going to increase. And just like we have this narrative about poor kids, we have a narrative about kids who don't speak English as their primary language. Despite the fact that cognitive scientists have told us that folks who speak multiple languages have gifts and talents that monolingual folks like I do not have. And then in Los Angeles, we outlawed bilingual education about 15 years ago. How do you take away a primary language from students? And then we say, oh yeah, by the way, if you want to go to college, guess what you need to take when you're in high school? A language. I don't understand. Okay? So let's stay one step in our, let's continue to unpack this classroom because we have to understand the situation. 5 of our 30 students right here in Pittsburgh would not be reared by their biological parents. They're raised by who? Yeah, extended family members, grandparents, foster parents. I met a woman last year in Chicago, was 96 years old, raising her great-great-great-grandchildren. Understand the reality, right? Home looks different for every child, and you cannot walk into that classroom and tell that child, take this to your mother or your father and have them sign it, because some of them will look at you like, I have not seen them and you don't know how long, right? And in Los Angeles, we have these big adoptive fairs because we know black boys are the group of young people who are least likely to be adopted, right? And they don't like it because the bottom line is we continue to send this message that they are not important. We have these big adoptive fairs. They dress these kids up and they have them meet these adoptive parents and they say, okay, be on your best behavior and make sure you talk nice and act nice because we want some of these folks to possibly adopt you. And these young boys do it every time, but they consistently get overlooked. And no one wants to adopt them. And no one says that they're worthy. So that's why we see some of our young people who are constantly angry. If somebody tells you all the time that you are not worthy, you are not valued, you are not loved, yeah, I'd be angry too. So understand where that angst comes from. Understand the situation. Let's stay one step in our classroom. What we know is that right here in your Pittsburgh schools, 2 of your 30 students would be homeless. You got kids who are living in shelters, kids who are living in cars, kids who are on the streets. You got to know that reality. You got to understand that set of circumstances, right? You see some of these kids at lunch who oftentimes hoard, can I have your apple, can I have your milk, can I have those chips? Why are they doing that? That's for later, that's for tomorrow. Understand that you have young people, we cannot be whole unless we are physiologically well. And I'm saying this is the situation that we don't talk about. So you can tell me about grit all day long, but if I have not had anything to eat, grit doesn't mean a thing to me. You can talk about grit until the cows come home, but if I don't know where I'm gonna sleep that night, I could care less about your grit. It's grit sleeping on the streets at night. Right? We need to have frank conversation with folks about the realities that our young people face because some adults who are quick to criticize our young people cannot survive for one day in our children's world. Not one day, right? But you want to tell these kids to have grit, right? And then the part that we don't talk about, and this is an ugly part of the reality, but we know 7 out of the 30 students right here, we got this data from your CPS division, will have been exposed to some type of physical, verbal, sexual, or emotional abuse before turning 18 years old. And the data we collect almost in every city or county that we collect data on says that for every one case that we know about, there's probably another case that has not been reported, but that should be reported. So now we're talking about almost half of our young people have experienced some type of abuse. And this is the part of the job and the work that is hard to talk about, but we have to talk about it. You know, my wife's a children's social worker, and she brings these cases home, and it's just hard for me to hear these realities of what young people go through sometimes. This cuts across black, white, Asian, Latino. This is middle class, upper class, lower class. And she brings these cases home. Like, you know, I have just so much admiration for the strength that young people manifest to deal with these circumstances. She got this case right now. This young girl is 10 years old, lives with her 2 younger brothers and mom. And this, you know how this story works. Mom meets the boyfriend. The boyfriend moves in the house to help take care of the kids. Starts to sexually molest the 10-year-old girl, says that if she says anything about this to anyone, he will harm her as well as her 2 younger siblings. That child is still showing up at school every day. So when that child is disengaged, it's not because she don't care about your assignment. If she's not socially there, it's not because she thinks school is not important. It's that she's dealing with some of the most horrific kinds of things that no child should have to deal with. This is just part of the reality. We have to, if there's one little thing you take away from my brief time with you today, is that relationships matter, folks. And we have to find the way to connect to young people to understand their circumstances. So this young 10-year-old girl finally musters up the courage to tell her mom what the boyfriend has been doing to her. Now, you don't know where this is going. Mom does not believe her. Says she's trying to come between her and the boyfriend. Puts the girl out of the house. So now she's not only a victim of sexual abuse, she's also what? Homeless. I'm saying, don't tell me about grit, because these children still show up every single day. That's grit. In the face of hostility and adversity, you still show up and you still do your work. That's unbelievable amounts of grit, right? So when we add all this up, what we have to recognize, and this is where the new work is going, is that we're now talking about trauma that a lot of our young people are dealing with every single day. It's the emotional residue left over from these heightened stressed events. And we've seen study after study after study that shows that, look, that trauma has an impact on socio-emotional development, cognitive development, emotional development, and the overall ability to learn, right? And part of what we have to do is have a frank conversation in this country about mental health, because we have lots of folks walking around here with untreated trauma. Teacher education programs nationally, mine included, do not do a good job of preparing teachers to understand this. And what we see is oftentimes what teachers will label as bad behavior, and I would argue that in many cases we're talking about untreated trauma, okay? So what we have to understand that this is a national reality. Almost half of students have shown at least one kind of trauma. 1 in 4 shows some type of trauma before the age of 4, right? We know that in a study we looked at in Los Angeles, almost 97% of 6th graders show that they experienced some type of traumatic event in the past year. And I'm saying that we have to recognize that children of color oftentimes are at greater risk for trauma for reasons I'll talk about in a moment. But I need us to understand that this is happening here in Pittsburgh, it's happening in Los Angeles. You go to any city, big or small, we have to have these conversations, because we have young people who are hurting, young people who are struggling, young people who are in pain, yet we're quick to say these kids don't have the kind of grit to be successful in schools. So how do we unpack this? We need to first become trauma aware and understand that there are different types of trauma. So some of it's single incident trauma. Some kids have one incident, losing a loved one, a friend or relative, that completely derails them for a lifetime, right? So we have to help provide the proper interventions to help young people who experience single incident trauma. For some of our young people, it's complex or repetitive trauma. It's happening every single day or every single week or every single month. Like the young girl I explained to you who was 10 years old, where that trauma was being relived on a regular basis. That is just unfortunate and should not happen to any child. For some of our students, we know that it's developmental trauma. For some of our students, it's all they've known. It's from the day that they took their first breath, it's always been trauma. So it's developmental, and you have to understand that. I hate to talk about this next one, but some of it is intergenerational trauma. Right? This is the hard part. We have to have difficult conversations. I know some of us who work in schools, you oftentimes ask, why does that child behave like that? Why does that child act that way? And then you have the mother or father show up, and it answers all your questions about why, right? It's learned behavior. And oftentimes we see 2, 3, 4 generations of trauma that's never been disrupted, and we have to understand the root cause. So the question we should be asking is not what is wrong with that child. The question we should be asking is what happened to that child. That's the fundamental question. We do it the other way around. We assume something is flawed or wrong with that child. Then we also have historical trauma. Some groups in this country have this historical trauma that we don't address. Folk of color, queer folks, folks who are on the margins, refugees, immigrants. We have to understand these different types of trauma, okay? And now where we are in California, we're seeing a different type of trauma. We're seeing what is referred to as mixed immigration status family trauma. Because of the political climate that we are in, we see, I should have put a picture, we have ICE trucks set up, not ice cream, ICE, okay, there's a difference here. ICE trucks set up outside of schools where there are large Latino populations in Los Angeles. Now think about it. You have some parents who have stopped bringing their children to school because they're fearful of deportation, they're fearful of what may happen. So you talk about being traumatized, right? If I'm a child and I go to school and I don't know if I'm going to be picked up and detained, I don't know if my mother or father's going to be picked up and detained, that's another type of trauma that we have not even accounted for that has a clear racial implication, okay? Now, I'm saying we have to begin to look at race-based trauma, because if you look at the trauma across the board, by and large, it talks about issues of violence and abuse and neglect, which are all valid. But part of what I want us to be careful about is oftentimes we pathologize these kinds of traumas. And I don't want us to pathologize them. I want us to understand that there are root causes that explain why they occur. But part of what we don't do with trauma is look at race-based trauma that is triggered by having young people of color, or people of color in general, who are experiencing different types of treatment every single day. So race-based trauma begins to ask questions about how is it that children who have to walk into racially hostile classrooms feel about that kind of trauma, right? What does it mean when you have teachers who constantly make these sort of underhanded, what they think are compliments, but they're backhanded slaps in the face about your intellect in classrooms? I'm saying it's another type of trauma that we're not even beginning to tap into, and that can have just as much impact on young people as the other types of trauma. And I raise that because what tends to happen with teachers tend to think all the trauma happens outside of them, right? This is what their parents do to them. This is what their community does to them, not recognizing how they oftentimes are complicit in reiterating that same type of trauma through a race-based trauma lens, okay? So part of what I'm asking us to do is first familiarize ourselves with the ACEs. Everybody should be taking this test, because this is a study that was done in 1998 by Folletti that showed that, look, we have a lot of untreated trauma around here. This is a simple 10-item test that we are asking teachers to take, and when teachers take it, they realize, wow, I got more trauma than I realized. And part of what we're seeing is that teachers are then sort of projecting their trauma onto their students in ways that are devastating. And part of what Folletti and Anda did with there, they looked at the ways in which this toxic childhood stress plays itself out. So 10 simple questions you can go through, and they ask you, items such as, whether or not you felt like you were, neglected, if you were abused, if you made you feel uncomfortable. And it really helped to shed light on the fact that you have these adverse childhood experiences that continue to impact how you think about yourself as an adult. And so the ASA study was really important when it came out, 20 years ago almost. But part of what this study missed was that context matters. And so that's what led folks in Philadelphia about, 5 years ago, to look at what they referred to as the Philadelphia Project, or the Urban ACEs study. And the Urban ACEs study was important because it said that, look, folks who grow up in urban communities face different types of challenges compared to folks who are not in those kind of circumstances. And as they ran their analysis, they began to see some fundamental differences. And if you look at the bottom part here, what you see the first ACEs did not look at was issues around witnessing violence, which is traumatic. Issues around feeling like you've been discriminated against, which is traumatic. Unsafe neighborhood, which is traumatic. Experiencing bullying, which is traumatic. Living in foster care, which has its own trauma. So part of what I really appreciate about the Philadelphia study compared to the initial studies that begin to ask some very specific kinds of contextual issues that we know are germane to the urban context. I think there's a need to do a similar kind of study within rural communities, because I think there's certain type of traumas that are there as well. But part of what we're seeing is that while the initial ACEs study was important, it gave us a starting point. The Urban ACEs study was critical because it began to give us a contextual sort of understanding within certain communities. But what we're looking at now is what we're referring to as racially adverse childhood experiences, or what we're referring to as races. Because again, folks don't want to address this in ways that begins to say children of color experience sometimes something very fundamentally different. And it's important for us to raise certain questions and add this layer to what kids say, because oftentimes what we do is we're starting to see more schools who add this ACEs exam with their students to see how much trauma they've experienced, because again, they're looking to deflect to say, see, this is what the home does. We pathologize communities and homes, but we don't ask those same young people, what about in your schools? What kind of races do you face there? Because part of what we think is that there's certain kinds of questions that we should be asking students about what they encounter in schools, such as, has a teacher ever said something to you that you consider to be racially offensive or insensitive? And as we're running some of these early talent, we're seeing that almost half, 2/3 of our students saying, yeah, we see that all the time. I'm amazed to hear some of the things that our students say, teachers say to them, right? Comments that they make directly about them that are highly, highly insensitive, but for some of our students, it becomes just norm. They're just accustomed to it. We should also have in this racist assessment, have you ever witnessed a classmate being targeted unfairly? Because remember, the trauma is not just it happens to you, the trauma is if you even see it happening, right? You know, I had a clip I was going to try to upload. You all saw the situation that happened in South Carolina last year, right, where the school resource officer comes in and body slams this young girl out of her seat, right? So what's intriguing to me is that not only what that young girl experienced, but what did all those young people in the classroom who saw that, what did they experience from a trauma standpoint? And we have more of our young people who see this trauma in schools every single day and don't realize the levels at which they may be affected. And this is school personnel. The same folks who are saying that this is what parents do to their kids don't recognize that they can also be complicit. Hard conversations that we have to have, right? So other questions that we should be asking. Has school security ever unjustly targeted you? See, we have to have this conversation about these school resource officers because I don't think we recognize how much they agitate and cause more problems than they help solve. Yeah, snap on that, because that's another conversation. I'm come back to that in a minute. And have you ever witnessed a classmate being unfairly chastised? Because part of what we hear kids say is that, look, I saw how my classmate was being treated, and some kids oftentimes are then placed with a dilemma. Do I intervene? Do I say something? Or do I sit back and do I remain silent? We saw in the case in South Carolina, the young girl who was being attacked by the school resource officer, when the other young girl said something about it, she was also arrested. Think about that. All she said was, why are you doing that to her? Somebody needs to stop. And they took her away with the other girl. So it puts students in this situation where they have to come to a real clear-cut decision. Do I intervene? Do I advocate on behalf of my classmates? Either way, it's a dilemma that could have its own trauma. Has a school administrator ever treated you differently because of your race? So again, this is not just teachers. These are also building-level administrators, folks. These are the folks in charge. Right? And they say it starts at the top. And I'm saying we have to have these frank conversations with our school administrators as well. And have your grades ever suffered, right? We have young people who tell us that sometimes I don't even like going to that class because of what that teacher says. I don't like being in his presence because of what he does. And let me say this. I always say this time and time again because I'm talking about what children of color face. And some folks think that this is something that only white teachers do to kids of color. Let me talk about it for a second, folks. White teachers are guilty in many ways. I'm not going to deny that, but let me be clear. White teachers do not have the exclusive on mistreating kids of color. I see teachers of color who are equally as complicit in this because we're talking about a mindset of how certain folks see kids of color. So don't let folks of color off the hook in this conversation by saying, well, you don't have to talk. No, you need to talk about race too, because this is oftentimes internalized oppression that folk of color don't realize. They're committing the same kind of heinous acts against young people of color like their white colleagues are. So this is about a mindset, not about a skin color, okay? So I'm saying that we have to look at racially adverse childhood experiences not only in the urban context, but also in middle and upper class schools. Why do I bring that up? This is personal experience. So my children now are telling me, they're old now, right? They're older. I should say they're old. They wouldn't like that. They're older, but they went to schools where most of their classmates were predominantly white and Asian. And they're telling me things now about comments that were made, insinuations that were made, jokes that were made by their peers about them. So I think we also need to make sure that our African-American, our Latino, our Southeast Asian kids who are in these schools where they're in the minority, that we protect them as well, because they are also in the middle, in the crosshairs of all types of racial microaggressions, right? Made by not just their peers, but their teachers as well. So this is about, again, class, right? Understand that class and race intersect in some powerful ways that begin to harm our children that oftentimes they don't even speak about in the moment. So talk to your children, talk to young people, even in those spaces. So how do kids begin to present when they are finding themselves in these traumatic situations? We find from our data it's three ways: they flight, they fight, or they freeze. And my folks who are in classrooms know and understand how that plays itself out. Some of our kids just flee. I don't want to be in a situation, they run out of class. We get more runners in schools now than we've ever seen before. Kids just up and just leave. I don't want to be here, right? Or they fight, right? Fight literally, fight by resisting, fight by being disruptive, fight by talking back, or some of them freeze. They just are numb, they shut down, emotionally disconnect. And part of what we have to understand, we see that as disruptiveness, and I'm saying that there's a greater cause, a deeper root that we have to begin to understand. So we have to all begin to put our psychologist hats on, our therapist hats on, to make sure that we're understanding when students exhibit this behavior, what they're trying to convey to us, that issues that are deeper than what we might think on the surface are manifest themselves. So the question becomes, so what do we do? How do we react? How can we begin to help offset these realities? So I want to kind of walk through a couple different steps of what we can do. Number one, we have to create racially informed trauma spaces for learning, okay? That means we have to begin to understand the prevalence and impact of trauma, know how to identify it, know how to respond to it, and how to help students manifest through it, okay? We see schools in LA now who are having wellness sessions with kids, yoga sessions with students, deep breathing kinds of sessions, help kids learn how to de-escalate as opposed to escalating situations, right? You gotta promote safety. Part of what kids need to know is that when they walk into a classroom, they feel like their emotions, their physical well-being are going to be protected and they're going to be safe. You gotta communicate with compassion, meaning that you are not going to judge kids because of circumstances that they cannot control. And earning their trust is a big part of this process. Again, I stress over and over again, we've got to know that we oftentimes overestimate the power of the situation. We underestimate the power of the situation. And address racial trauma. What could I be doing that might be aggravating or escalating the kind of hostility that young people are encountering? So we have to begin to become racially informed about trauma. I said a moment ago, we have to rethink these school resource officers because, again, I think these folks, generally speaking, are more of a problem than we want to admit. And I'm going to ask the young people about this because they might tell you some of them are fine, they do their jobs. Others want to be police officers but can't quite make the cut, so they feel like they're going to do their work in schools, right? You can clap on it. I know what you're talking about because I see it, I hear it, I know it, right? And so part of what we know is that we employ tens of thousands of school resource officers. And what we know is that those school resource officers are more likely to be in schools where there are children of color, despite the fact that there is little evidence to suggest that there's greater violence or crime in those schools. And so these folks have very little training and background on working with students, very little training on human development, engaging young people, and oftentimes these folks are looking for problems. If you look for a problem, sooner or later, guess what you're going to do? You're going to make somebody a problem. I wonder if we spent just a fraction of the cost that we spend on school resource officers, on mental health therapists and social workers, we wouldn't have a need for the school resource officers, okay? Why do you need to have a badge, a gun, a billy club? I'm like, what are we doing here, folks? We're talking about schools, places that are supposed to be supportive and learning spaces, okay? And look, some of these cases that you read about, we did an analysis on some of these cases here about, what these school resource officers, there was a case in Alabama. Between 2006 and 2011, the police repeatedly pepper sprayed students with the chemical freeze plus P for infractions as minor as back-talking and challenging authority. This was essentially pepper spray, spraying children in their faces repeatedly. Over 1,000 young people were exposed to this pepper spray despite the fact that they were not doing anything egregious, and most of them were African American. Why do we have pepper spray in schools and we're spraying children for any reason that doesn't pose a threat to anybody? Right? Or now there was young Cade McCadden who was 7 years old, who got handcuffed in a Michigan elementary school because of his behavior. Why are we handcuffing 7-year-old babies? And then what made his situation even worse is that they handcuffed him to calm the young boy down, but then for 30 minutes they could not get the handcuffs off because the officers lost the keys, right? This is lawsuit stuff, right? I maintain if we ever saw this happening in an affluent school, we would be quick to have somebody's job, right? If this ever happened with rich families, they would be saying not only is jobs going to be had, but heads will roll. You cannot treat my children this way. Why do our kids have to be treated the same way, right? So I'm saying we have to ask the question, why do kids of color, why do poor kids get exposed to this kind of behavior on a repeated basis? What else do we need to do? We need to understand cognitive science, which tells us that, look, the brain is a social organ that develops within the context of relationships. I will say it one more time, relationships. I will say it the third time, relationships. I will ask you to say it with me, relationships. Can we say it one more time together? Relationships, they matter. You all have heard the saying that what, kids don't care what you know till they know that you what? Care. So we are understanding with the brain that this is all about the ways in which we connect to people based on whether or not we think they have our best interests at heart. And kids will size you up and down, look you frontwards and backwards, talk to other kids to determine whether or not you are somebody that they feel is worthy of their time, attention, and engagement, right? I say all the time, you go to school, I love to ask the kids, who are the good teachers, who are the bad teachers? They can tell you just like that. Am I right, young folks? We're not going to name names, but you know what I'm talking about, right? And I'm saying that it has nothing to do with race, gender, height, age. It's about what's in your heart and what's in your head about how you think about young people. Relationships matter, folks. Plain and simple. I'm talking to my son now. My son's a middle school teacher, and he is going through it. He was like living like, man, 7th grade is hard, Dad. I said, I told you, man. You got to be real. I understand this work is not easy. But part of what he's doing is he's building through knowing his kids. I always make the argument, spend the first 2 weeks teaching nothing content related, but use the first 2 weeks to get to know your students. Plain and simple, find out about their interests, what they like, what they dislike, right? Who's at home? All these factors help build relationships and trust that can save you all kinds of stresses and headaches down the line, okay? What else do we need to do? We need to understand that resilience is important. Now, you're not gonna get to the academic stuff if kids are not whole and healthy. Let me say that one more time. You're not gonna get to the academic stuff unless you get to whole and healthy kids. We put the cart before the horse, or is it the horse before the cart? Whatever, we do it backwards, right? What we do is we focus on testing, outcomes, and kids are hungry. Kids are not healthy. It's Maslow's hierarchy 101, right? You cannot deal with the higher order needs until the most basic of needs are met, folks. I don't know what we have to do. I keep telling this to school leaders, to superintendents. Stop focusing on testing until you know that kids are cared for, that they're safe, that they're protected, that they've had lunch that afternoon or breakfast that morning. These things matter, okay? So we have to understand resilience because it's an important part of this work. We also have to begin to enhance our intellectual sort of dexterity around this topic. So here are 5 good books to read, okay? So look, you need to read on the far left, The Condemnation of Blackness, how we have these ideologies about condemning what it means to be black in this country. We've done it from day one. We still do it explicitly and implicitly. You got to read Susan Craig's book around trauma-sensitive school. It is the best book I've seen on trauma thus far. I think it's a must-read. We have our teacher education students reading it right now. You have to read this middle book, Stamped from the Beginning, which is a thick book, a thick read, a heavy, but well worth it. It goes to, again, the root cause of why we see these issues in our schools and in our society. The top book is Push Out by Monique Morris that begins to unpack the ways we are beginning to criminalize and push out black girls in some really, really, really destructive ways. And there's this phenomenal book by this guy named Milner that you have to read, okay? It's called Racing the Class. It is the best book I've seen that is at the nexus of how poverty and race matter, right? Folks want to make this just an issue of class, and what Milner does eloquently, I'm not just saying this because he's here, I say this on the road all the time, that what he does is shows that kids of color experience something very different than their white counterparts. So I'm saying part of what we have to do is we have to intellectually engage ourselves and strengthen up what we're doing, okay? Let me wrap up. I'm getting close to the end. I said I had a lot to say and a little bit of time to say, and I'm going to get to it, Lori, okay? All right, so now we have to understand the dimensions of structural racism because this is what this is all about, understanding the root causes of the history and culture and the interconnected institutions of policy that continue to push out black and brown kids and not give them the opportunity. They don't oftentimes have the language to articulate it, but we have to begin to help them understand the structures that are part of what we see in schools every day. One step further, we have to also understand that we need to have explicit discussions on racism. Not only institutional racism, we know about that, but part of what I'm wanting to do, and this is what is talked about in Stanford from the beginning, is the racism of good intentions. Because this is what is most prevalent in our schools. People who think that they have good intentions are doing right by children of color, but are doing devastating impact on our young people, right? By lowering expectations, telling these kids what they can't do. I'm saying, understand there's a difference between intent and impact. These folks say, well, you know what, that was not my intention. I don't care what your intentions are. I'm talking about the impact you have on young people. And understand that there's a racism of good intention that needs to be disrupted and challenged. And then finally, what we need to start doing, and my colleague at UCLA, Danny Solorzano, he talks about racial microaggressions, and now what we're saying is how do we combat racial microaggressions? One of the ways we can combat them is through this concept that we're talking about is microaffirmations. And microaffirmations are important because they're little ways and we can begin to build up sort of the humanity of our children by saying things that are affirming, right? I see you, I value you, right? I appreciate your differences. I'm committed to understanding your needs, right? How can I help you? I believe in your potential. These are small things, but when they're said to our children repeatedly, it becomes part of their DNA, it becomes part of how they see themselves. Microaffirmations can be used as a way to offset the microaggressions, right? And sometimes it's little things, like I like that haircut, I like those shoes, I see those new glasses you have. Our kids get beat up so much through media and through other outlets, we have to lift them up. That's why I love freedom schools, right? You understand, I got you, sister, to me, I had you, right? Freedom schools build up the cultural and racial integrity of our students because it tells them they matter. Tells them that they are beautiful, tells them that they are brilliant. It says that their culture is an important part of who they are, right? And then we also have to recognize that microaffirmations can happen on so many levels through individual effort and success. And it's more than being nice. It's about opening up pathways, right? I oftentimes say, I stand here doing the work that I do because somebody saw something in this big-headed boy that I didn't see in myself when I was growing up in Compton. Having someone believe in you is the most important thing that you can have. I say all the time, we are the products of other people's expectations. I'll say it one more time. We are the product of other people's expectations, right? Bottom line, my mother who never went to college, the first time she ever stepped foot on the college campus was when she dropped me off. But she used to tell my brother and I all the time, when you go to college, when you go to college. She made everything about when you go to college. Boy, clean up that room, because when you go to college, I don't want you to be a slob, right? Boy, learn how to cook, because when you go to college, everything was about college. If somebody tells you over and over and over again when you go to college, guess what you think you're supposed to do after 12th grade? Go to college, right? Those are micro-affirmation that builds up the potential of what our young people can do, okay? I'm closing out. I'm gonna finish on this, okay? I can't finish without this. Look, someone mentioned this earlier. Where you at, Jordan? I see you at. I got you here, right? I told you, look, we have to push our teachers to get out of this sympathetic way of thinking about this work. These folks do damage to our children, folks. They're sympathetic because they feel sorry for our students because they're poor blacks. Stop it. You're not gonna help anybody by feeling sorry for them, okay, folks? Lift our kids up. They lower expectations oftentimes, which again is the soft bigotry that oftentimes occurs in classrooms. And when you do that, you don't challenge students. I'm asking you to not engage in this pedagogy of poverty and not to operate with this deficit-based thinking. We need you to stop being sympathetic and become more empathetic. Empathetic teaching operates from an asset-based perspective, folks. Assets. We see strengths in our young people. We see their promise and potential, and we do that. We listen to and we learn from students. We recognize that their cultural experiences matter. We don't negate them. We hold students accountable to rigor, depth, and complexity. Stress that one more time. Rigor, depth, and complexities in every classroom. Even for those students who were struggling, we still hold them to rigor, depth, and complexity, right? We expect and demand excellence. That's my 5th grade teacher, Ms. Russell, who used to hold us accountable every single day. She said, in my classroom, you will learn. I tell people during my 5th grade year, we may have had recess half a dozen times. She did not let us go to recess. She said, if you can't spell recess, you're not going to recess, okay? But she expected and demanded excellence of us all the time, right? We develop complex and critical thinking approaches to this work. And the bottom line, as I get ready to close, is you have to teach like lives depend on it. Teach like lives depend on it. You know why, folks? Because they do. So I want to challenge each and every one of us to understand that this work is life-changing. It's life-transforming. We have to have folks remember why they chose to do this work. I tell teachers all the time, when teachers complain to me, I'm like, you chose to do this, right? Nobody put a gun to your head and said you have to be here. Give other people's children the same time, commitment, intensity, and effort that you expect to be given to your own children. If you can't give that, then get out, leave, find something else to do, right? We got a whole lot of potential, a whole lot of promise that needs to be recognized. This is our civil rights era issue, folks, plain and simple. And we have to push, we have to shove, we have to kick and prod. We got to get folks to do the right thing, because we have to help them to understand that if we turn our backs on young people today, they are going to turn on us tomorrow, because we're going to need these folks. We're going to get old and decrepit one day, and the last thing you want to do is to walk into that doctor's office when you need something and you see that child that you've neglected and abandoned, and if you neglecting that child today, when that child becomes a doctor tomorrow, she's going to see you suffering. She's going to walk out on you and say, you know what? Come on now. Thank y'all. I appreciate y'all. Y'all been phenomenal, okay?
We have time for just a few questions. If you have a question, please stand, and someone will bring a microphone to you. Questions. I have a question in the back.
Dr. Howard, you talked about expectations. Why don't you talk about how it was when we left the plantation and they had those 2-room schools and we were making A's and B's, and now we're getting D's and F's?
Man, how long we got for that question, brother? Yeah, so, I mean, look, this is about what we expect. I mean, we know what happened for many folk of color, black folk in particular. Once we started leaving our schools and we started interacting in schools that had teachers who did not see our brilliance and potential, it went downhill from there. And folks like Jackie Irvine have talked about desegregation. Folks like Vanessa Siddle Walker talked about the ways in which these rich, complex learning environments in segregated schools were phenomenal and priceless and lifted our children up and helped them reach heights that no one thought was possible. We got to find a way to recapture that because, again, bottom line, we have folks in schools who just don't have the best interests of our kids at heart. I appreciate that question.
Thank you for coming. I would argue schools do exactly what they were designed to do. They value efficiency, and when you value efficiency, then you can have practices like expulsion, suspension, devaluing humans.
Right.
And what I would ask you, how might we shift the system to value what is important to get those, to create a more compassionate and empathic environment?
Yeah.
And what I would ask you also is, what is the purpose of education?
Oh, man. Again, y'all asking these deep questions here, right? So I had a conversation with someone today. I forgot where he went. But look, here's the thing. I have the same conversation with my undergraduate students because I think there's a strong case that can be made around schools being essentially in place to do the very things that they are doing, right? The argument that social reproduction theorists make that schools are just reproducing inequality. And we all play an active role in that, right? But I guess I'm just too stubborn to think that we're going to go along with that. We have to disrupt. We have to agitate. And we may not see some of this in our lifetime, but I think what we're doing, we're chipping away because we hope that our children have something that's a little bit better than what we had, that our children's children have something a little bit better than what they had. The goal here is to recognize that, look, these opportunities that we have today, as challenging as they are, have only occurred because we stand on the shoulders of men and women who put up with a whole lot more stuff than we put up with, right? They are the real sheroes and heroes. They are the unnamed sort of beacons and giants who put up with way more hostility. And I'm saying that, yes, schools do play a role in reproducing inequality and racism and sexism and homophobia. However, I think that we have got to be, resistant. We've got to be stubborn and say, we got to chip away at patriarchy. We got to chip away at white supremacy. We got to chip away at, at all these different forms of oppression that we know are just killing our people every single day. So we don't give up. We don't recognize that this is much bigger than us. We just put our heads down and we do the work the best way we can, but we do it with the consciousness. And part of what I tell young folks who go away to college is that you don't abandon your communities when you go to college. You leave your communities, you go to college, but you get your education, and you don't let that education transform you. You help to basically acquire the skills so you can go back and help your communities. And that's the way we have to think about this, is that consciousness is what will help us ultimately get to where we need to get. All right?
Hello, I'm
you
DeAndre
doing, sir?
Gordon. I'm a junior at Holy Family Academy.
Come on, give that brother a round of applause.
Well, I've noticed that throughout time, the educational system trains everyone to see the world in certain labels. For example, I am black, she is white. Instead of training us to learn things how it's just supposed to be, like we're human. Do you feel like once we get past that point of seeing things in labels, we will be able to not see things in race and just
Give
progress?
that young man a scholarship. We need a scholarship for that young man right there, right? No, thank you for that question, sir. No, that's the ultimate goal. The goal is to get to a place and a space in our country where we are able to come together on our one common accord, is that the fact, as you said it, we are all members of the same race, which is the human race. And that should be our unifying element. But unfortunately, we live in a country that has this history of racism that has kind of put this ugly stuff in the air that allows us or doesn't allow us to see people for their humanity, but to see them through this racial prism. And so that's why I say in order for us to be post-racial, which is what you're describing, young man, I think we have to be racial first. But I think the hard part for us is that we don't want to talk about race, because if we talk about race, then we have to acknowledge privilege. And we don't like to acknowledge privilege in this society because we love to think that everyone is where they are based on their own individual merit. And if you talk about privilege, it disrupts merit, and that kind of sort of just dismantles the whole American meritocracy thing. So the idea is, let's talk about our privileges. Let's own up to the ways in which certain folks have advantages. Once we can start to do that, I think we'll be in a much better place. So I'm dependent on your generation to be better with this than we have been, because we need to be better. Okay?
Ladies and gentlemen, one more time, Dr. Tyrone C. Howard, UCLA. That was outstanding. That was outstanding. Thank you very much, Dr. Howard. Derek.
Thank you. In the words of Jay-Z, allow me to reintroduce myself. I would like to bring before you the Shona Sharif African Dance and Drum Ensemble. They are a core piece of the University of Pittsburgh and one of the most significant groups because of their history and because of their current activity. And we appreciate them not only for carrying forward tradition, but for carrying forward that tradition in a way that embraces youth and children. And so again, if you are looking to bring some culturally relevant activity to your institutions, please engage Mr. Arande Sharif and his ensemble. Thank you. And as the others are coming, I want to just present this certificate of appreciation to you. Thank you for your work. Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Can I ask people to come up and dance?
I've asked specifically these guys.
Anybody want to come up and dance with us?
That's a serious question.
Yeah, I'm serious, yeah. Who's your cousin?
Oh, Dijon.
Dijon. We got a crew. Lamont, can you teach them the song? The first dance we're going to do is called Lamba. Oh, Kia, come on. Okay. Angie, get up here.
I'm not going to use the microphone. Can you hear me? Yes. I'm trying to project. Can you hear me in the back?
Did you do this thing?
Okay. Repeat after me. I jolly. I jolly. Analeka. I jolly. And there's a little melody that goes with it. It's call and response. In the village, this dance is performed in Mali, and in the village, when a griot historian comes into the village, they do call and response and yell out. Let's try this again. A little louder. I'm one person louder than all you guys.
Now, these people here were students of my mother, and this one here was my student. So it's just one big circle. Go around. Now, for those of you wondering what to do with all that verve you see in your classroom, call Dr. Sharif, okay? Thank you again. Give a round of applause. Thank you for being here. Thank you.
That was outstanding. Let's give this group another round of applause. I especially want to thank Arunde and also our very own Heinz fellow, Jordan. Let's give her another round of applause. Just talented, all kind of talents, right? Yeah. All right, so what I want to do, please hang with us to the degree that you're able. We will move as quickly as possible. We're going to move now and recognize our Alan Lesko Award recipients. But before I do that, I want to take this opportunity to acknowledge two folk who've been with me and really made a huge difference in the work we do in the Center for Urban Education. I want to ask Matt Wine to come forward here. I want to just show my appreciation for Matt. Let's give Matt a hand as he comes forward. So Matt is receiving the Outstanding Service Award from the center, and I'm very, very grateful to Matt. So thank you for all you do.
Thank you.
And then secondly, I'd like to ask Amy Witherspoon to come forward. And let's give Amy a round as she comes forward. Amy is receiving the Outstanding Service Award. I tell you, Amy really runs the center, real talk. If you ever want to know how things get done, it's because of her hard work and efforts and so forth. So I'm very grateful to you for all you do. Sometimes in the midst of busy days, we don't get to say, or we might forget to say thank you. I just want to express openly here to you how grateful I am for all you do to make CUE what it is. Thank you. All right. When the center was founded in 2002, it was because of the vision of one man and his commitment to improving urban education, Dean Alan Lesko. In his honor, the Alan Lesko Award for Excellence in Urban Education is presented to an organization, an educator, leader, or community member who demonstrates outstanding work and commitment to innovation and improvement in urban education. Today, we are fortunate to honor two individuals whose work exemplifies this commitment. This afternoon's recipient is a true champion of educational equity in Pittsburgh, and the first organization to receive the award will be A+ Schools. A+ Schools is a community advocate and leader for educational equity and excellence in the Pittsburgh Public Schools. Since its founding in 2004, A+ has sought to educate the public, increase awareness, and engage the community in removing the boundaries that prevent marginalized groups of students from attaining educational equity. A+ approaches this work by focusing on issues through research and policy analysis, engaging and elevating voices from community, creating more opportunities for community involvement, and building broad community support to advance change in the Pittsburgh Public Schools. In 2014, students from A+ Schools Teen Block program engaged over 1,700 of their peers to adopt a Student Bill of Rights, portions of which were approved by the Board of Education. Thanks in part to Teen Block advocacy and grants from the Department of Justice, the Pittsburgh Public Schools began piloting restorative justice practices in 2015. The district is now training personnel in all schools in restorative justice practices. A+ envisions a public school, envisions a public educational system in Pittsburgh with 100%, that's right, they said it, 100% of students graduating and 80% completing a training program in a 2- or 4-year college or university. Please join me in congratulating A+ Schools as recipients of the 2017 Lesko Award for Excellence in Urban Education. Thank you.
This is board member 16.
This isn't all our staff, but small with Mike. Thank you very much.
Dr. Shirley Biggs. After earning degrees from Duquesne University and the University of South Carolina, Dr. Shirley A. Biggs earned a doctorate of education at the University of Pittsburgh, where she taught, researched, and published on reading and literacy development and assessment of students at the secondary, college, and adult levels. Her research explores how older students, including adults, read and learn from textbooks. In addition, she continues to study mentoring processes and practices. She's the author of several articles, including books, Reading to Achieve, Strategies for Adult College Learners, and Technology-Assisted College Skills. She assisted in the development of the 2001 Pennsylvania Literacy Framework and co-wrote as lead author a chapter on investigating language. In addition to publishing numerous peer-reviewed articles, she served 15 years as editor of the Journal of College Literacy and Learning and 8 years as co-managing editor of the Negro Educational Review, where she still contributes as an executive associate editor. Dr. Biggs has consulted on projects from Homewood to South Africa. Locally, she has served on boards of the Pittsburgh Peace Institute, the Amani Christian Academy, the Point Park Advisory Group for Undergraduate Education, and the core steering committee for the Mount Arad Community Activity Center mentoring program. For 10 years, she served as director of Tutor, T-U-T-O-R, a PIT project that serves students in Hazelwood and Oakland sections of Pittsburgh. For her work, Dr. Biggs has received the Negro Educational Review's Distinguished Service Award, 2 awards for outstanding work in college reading from the International Literacy Association's College and Learning Group, and the University of Pittsburgh Tri-State Area Student Council Distinguished Educator Award. Dr. Biggs shows up and shows out for every event we have, and I'm very grateful to you for all the work you do to enhance the work we do with students and educators in the Pittsburgh public schools and communities. Ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming to the stage Dr. Shirley Biggs. Although we told the recipients they could not say anything, Dr. Biggs has said that she has a few words to share. And we're going to make that happen. Dr. Biggs.
Well, I'll be very brief, and I just want to thank Alan Lesko for having the vision to create the center, to do the things that we saw today, to bring a speaker like the speaker we have today. That is, just that is worth the effort. I want to thank Dr. Milner for realizing the vision and enhancing the vision that Dr. Lesko had. And I want to thank the center staff for the work that they do every day, going out into the schools, making that vision work, creating pathways so that we can do the authentic work of asking the right research questions and doing the kind of research that can make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Biggs. Reverend Lee Walls, a lifelong resident of Pittsburgh and recipient, really, of Pittsburgh's Hill District and product of Pittsburgh Public Schools, Lee Walls graduated from Shinley High in 1965. He is a graduate of Hampton University and has earned certificates in community development from Harvard University's Kennedy School and Robert Morris University. Mentoring from some of the Hill District's legendary leaders, including, get ready, Dwayne Cooper Jr., Dwayne Cooper Sr., Carl Redwood Sr., James Henry, Reverend Dr. Jason Barr, Dr. Jerome Taylor, Salah Udine, Dr. David Epperson, and Dr. and Mrs. Jake Wheatley, Reverend Johnny Monroe, they all instilled in Reverend Walls a passion for community activism. Reverend Walls entered the ministry in 1989 and began serving at Macedonia Church of Pittsburgh, where much of his work focused on youth. He served as program director for the Hill District Ministries, Youth Places, Bench Menders, and the Center That Cares. An active participant in the life of the Hill, he can be found serving the men's Bible class, re-entry ministry, caring ministry, and the Bible Institute of Macedonia Church of Pittsburgh. He is the founder and executive director of Amani Christian Community Development Corporation, a faith-based community and economic development organization in the Hill District focusing on revitalizing and social justice advocacy for children and youth. He seeks to uplift and encourage the people of the Hill District by working in areas that revitalize the community and its resources and developing the potential of its human capital. Additionally, he co-chairs the board of the Hill District Education Council, serves on the Hill District Ministries Alliance, the Shinley Heights Collaborative, the Hill District Consensus Group, and his granddaughter's Parent School Community Council. In addition to his duties at Macedonia, he is the senior pastor at Bethel Baptist Church in Bethel Park, Pennsylvania. When do you sleep? I would like to also add that there have been several individuals in Pittsburgh who have been a difference maker for me personally in my experience. Lee Walls is one of those folks. He and I enjoy a salmon burger every now and then over at the porch. He sends me emails of encouragement, and he does the work, and I'm very, very grateful to you for all you do and that all you will continue to do. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in a warm round of applause for the recipient of the 2017 Alan Lesko Award for Excellence in Urban Education, Reverend Lee Walls.
Now, this is really dangerous when you give a preacher a mic. I am very grateful to be here. There are a lot of people that I work with in our community that are very deserving of this award. I think often of, I'm so glad that I had the opportunity to hear Dr. Howard. One of the things that he captured for me is that we are a product of other people's expectations. And I would take the time to name all of my teachers from kindergarten through 12th grade that made a difference in my life. My high school counselor told me that the best thing for me to do was to join the Army. I decided that I had other options that were a lot better than that. And I give credit to the teachers, I give credit to my mother and to my grandmother, and to the youth who I'm looking at to my right. One of my favorite preachers is Reverend Lance Watson from Richmond, and he preaches a sermon, why can't we? Not why can't we, why can't we? Why can't we achieve? Why can't you be a doctor? Why can't you be a nurse? Why can't you be whatever it is that God has gifted you to be? Let's all of us continue on this team to make a difference in the lives of our young people. Thank you.
Someday I'm going to be able to ad-lib like Reverend Walls, I'll tell you. I'd now like to introduce Dr. Dana Thompson-Dorsey, CUE's new Associate Director of Research and Development, and I'd also add Associate Professor of Urban Education, tenured Associate Professor of Urban Education, for a few final words. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming out. I just want to give you a few final announcements. We would like you to join us next Tuesday, October 10th, at Reflection into Action as we work to move what we have heard here from Dr. Howard into action in our communities. This will be held from 4 to 6 p.m. at Holy Family Academy on Ohio River Boulevard. And you can get more details at our website. Also, we are having a brown bag series, and it will continue on October 19th. We've had our first one a few weeks ago, but we have another one on October 19th. And Carrie Coca will be delivering that particular brown bag. We have Carrie's actually in the audience. You want to stand, Carrie? We have a full slate of visiting scholars presenting for our Brown Bag series this year. So we encourage you to visit our website, CUE.pitt.edu, and sign up for our mailing list so you can find out about more of our events. Additionally, Pitt's Department of Africana Studies is hosting Dr. Molefe Asante in the second annual installment of its Distinguished Lecture Series this evening at 6:15 in the Frick Fine Arts Building. So if you feel like keeping the learning going this evening, please go hear Dr. Asante's talk. He has a wealth of knowledge to share. Thank you all for coming. We hope that you will join us for the reception and continue this discussion going. Have a good night.